Hey everyone, this is Brian from the Tennis IQ podcast. Josh and I hope that you're enjoying the content and discussions that we put out week after week. If you would like to support the podcast and help us to continue to produce quality episodes, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Currently, we have two tiers of support, $3 per month and $7 per month. So again, our Patreon page is patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Thank you so much. And now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Josh Berger.
And I'm Brian Lomax. And today we're going to talk about what to do when you are feeling tired in a match or a tournament, or maybe even feeling or experiencing some level of pain. This is an issue that has come up quite a bit recently for me with some of the players that I work with, and it's a great question as to what to do. There are many challenges when we as athletes are feeling some level of fatigue or pain, whether that's a nagging pain or something that's occurred. Maybe it's even a pain that maybe we should consider retiring and so forth. And then, of course, for many of you who are players, you may be playing more than one time a day, and there might be some level of recovery required between matches because you're very exhausted from one match and now we have to play again. And so this is a difficult situation because I think, Josh, like when you begin to experience fatigue on the court or pain, the mind tends to go to that feeling. And it tends to, I think, get very centered on the problem of fatigue. I'm tired. And, we talked about in one of our episodes distinguishing between sort of problem thinking and solution thinking, when we discussed the idea of a coach's voice and how using a coaching voice could help create some psychological distance between you and the problem. Another way of looking at it, and this is just maybe some slightly different terminology, but Jackie Reardon and Hans Deckers in their book Mindset talk about two different types of thinking, which is story thinking and action thinking. And if you think about it, when you start to focus more on your fatigue or tiredness, you begin to create this sort of whole story around the problem. Like, oh, why is this happening? Why am I, feeling this way? Now I'm going to lose this match, and so and so. And you start creating a whole story or narrative around the problem. So I've kind of centered on calling it problem story thinking. And that isn't going to help you actually win the match, right? The goal is, can we get to more solution and action oriented thinking in that moment? Easier said than done, right, Josh? And so I'd love to just get sort of your opening thoughts on the topic, and then we can start talking about how to address some of these things.
Yeah, I think it's an issue or a situation that most tennis players have been in, whether it's late in a match, it's a third set, for instance, or just deep in the match, or if it's sort of that time where you have to play multiple matches in a day, whether it's a tournament or it's a situation where you have to play both singles and doubles, and you're going into a match already exhausted or maybe not feeling 100% physically. So I think it's a situation that most tennis players, maybe all tennis players, have been in, whether it's the tiredness, whether it's an injury, or both. And we see it at the pro level as well. And we saw it at the Australian Open very recently with Djokovic. We've seen it constantly with top ATP, top WTA players, both in terms of playing through pain and being having to deal with being tired, being exhausted, being sore going into matches or during matches, right? And we see that sometimes, right? Whether it's cramping, whether it's more serious physical situations where it really hampers somebody's ability to continue a match, whether it's, all sorts of types of situations. I mean, I've been through situations in the past where I've had pretty bad cramps. I've been lucky to avoid um, many other injuries. But yeah, I think, I think it's a really important topic because most tennis players have been there, and it can certainly come up in the past in the future. So it's, I think, really important to be able to think some of these things through ahead of time, and then have a game plan for how you want to handle it if it does come up.
So let's start then with the first scenario of you're in a match, and that's when fatigue sets in at some point. It's probably a longer match, um, maybe late in the second, sometime in the third set, and these thoughts come up. What do we do in that situation? And I think um, it's a time to remember why we're out there, because you can get, as I just said earlier, you can get stuck in focusing on the problem, creating a whole story around it, but that won't lead to you coming out on top in the end. And one mantra, I don't know if I know we talked about the fighter's mind in one of our episodes, and there's a chapter in there about an ultra marathoner. And so these are guys who run, a typical marathon is 26.1 miles. These races are anywhere between like 50 and 100 more, right? And so one of the pieces of advice with respect to exhaustion and tiredness was kind of a confusing statement, but it's like, it never always gets worse. So what that means is when you're feeling tired, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to continue to feel worse and worse and worse. You actually might feel better. And so can that bring a little bit of optimism? And he told some stories about that. And I've read other books about ultra marathoners in which they didn't necessarily talk about that phrase, but they described situations in which they were on the ground in complete exhaustion, and then like 20 minutes later they're back running and feeling great. So remember that just because you're feeling tired doesn't mean it will get worse and worse and worse. It probably will if you remind yourself how tired you are and continue to go with that story. But it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that if we can bring to mind, hey, I want to win this match, right? If that is still there, then we can commit to finding some solutions in this moment. Because I think, some of the effects of fatigue, Josh, like if we let it set in and be how we're going to feel, the will to win does typically go down. Your ability to manage your emotional state is compromised. Your ability to focus on the things you can control are compromised. And you may even see that in the sort of problem story thinking going on. You're sort of getting upset about something that is just reality in the moment, and you're kind of fighting it. And I think this is really the first key is, can I accept that this is how I'm feeling? And then decide what to do in that moment. So I think that's kind of like step one, Josh. And I just want to stop there, just get your thoughts on noticing the problem and then, and dealing with it at that point.
Yeah, I think being able to notice it, be aware of it, is a really important step in accepting that, right? I think oftentimes, whether it's maybe a negative thought that comes up, or an emotion that is uncomfortable, or it's an injury, or tiredness or soreness or whatever it is, or just exhaustion. Maybe it's exhaustion from playing in the heat or humidity. And I know we had an episode on that where we talked about, how people can approach those situations. But I think yeah, that acceptance of the situation is a really important first step. I find, sometimes people like to sort of push these thoughts out of their head, or ignore them, or pretend that they're not there, and then that can, lead to more issues. So I think, first being aware of the situation and then getting to that point of acceptance, and then we can start to think, okay, what do we want to do about it, right? What needs to be done in this situation? How do we want to handle it? Is the pain so bad that that we feel that it's possible we could be doing more damage and actually making the situation worse, and it's actually at the point where a retirement is really the only option or the best option, which we certainly see situations where athletes continue to try to play through the pain and end up making things worse. So is that the situation where we're putting ourselves in greater danger for the future because of that sort of insistence on competing? But I think more often it continuing to compete is the best option. So it's really, okay, what do I need to do now? Are there things that I can do in the moment, right? Whether it's certain things you can do during the changeover, or certain things you can do in between points to help yourself. Certainly if it's tiredness or exhaustion, sort of catch your breath in between points. Really try to make sure that you're having a good game plan going into the next point, so that you don't feel like you're spending all of that, let's say 20 seconds in between points, just focusing on your exhaustion or the pain or whatever it is. But can we get to that point where we're really focused on what we have to do next in that upcoming point, and really putting our focus and attention there as much as possible? And yeah, Brian, I think you brought up a really good point there, that it doesn't always get worse, and it doesn't always stay the same. It doesn't always stay as painful or as uncomfortable as it feels in that moment. Things come and go, right? We have a pain, we have a feeling, and it ultimately passes. Sometimes it does get worse. Sometimes it does sort of linger, but oftentimes it does improve. And maybe there are certain things that you can do in the moment, right? Whether it's whatever it is, whether it's massaging the area, whether it's, if you're playing, high school or college tennis, maybe you have access to calling a trainer. That's the type of situation. If there's pain, to at least see, hey, maybe a trainer can actually help me in that situation, and calling for, an injury timeout, something of that matter. But I think, yeah, recognizing that just because you feel a certain way now does not mean that it's going to be sticking around or getting worse, I think is really important. And also, we've seen constant examples, right? If we think about the pros, of players who have stuck around, and the pain or the cramps or whatever it was improved, right? I can think of a really crazy match last year, actually, between Stefan Koslov and Grigor Dimitrov. I don't know if you saw this one, Brian, but it was
Yeah.
there was a point in the match where Stefan Koslov was cramping so bad that he really couldn't move at all. I think his whole body, like, he essentially like collapsed onto the court. I believe he had won the first. Someone can fact check me on this, but I think he had won the first set. This happened like in the second set, and he, lost the second set. Didn't look like he was even going to be able to continue the match. Ended up whatever it was. Maybe he got treatment, or I don't think you can usually get treatment for cramps, but maybe whatever it was, maybe he took a painkiller, or whatever the situation was. But he ended up winning the match in the third set, in a pretty dramatic, miraculous fashion. So I think it often is that case, that if you can just kind of stick around, you give yourself a chance, right? Are you going to be at your best in that moment right after cramping that severely? Likely not. But if you can stick around, if you can be patient, if you can keep yourself in the match for a little bit longer, you give yourself a chance, and then things can start to change. Maybe you start feeling better. Maybe your opponent gets frustrated. It can be, I think one skill that I often think is really important for tennis players is to be able to put yourself in your opponent's shoes. And many people have probably faced an opponent who's injured, or faced an opponent who's exhausted and not moving well. And in many ways, that can actually be very frustrating. It can actually be very tough, in my experience, and I've seen this with other players as well. It can be very tough to fit, to beat somebody or finish off somebody who's injured or not playing at your best, because I think at that point your expectations really shift. You start to have the expectation that this should be easy. I should be winning every point here. And then when that doesn't happen, when maybe the match is close or your opponent wins some points, or it seems like their level starts to increase, then that leads to frustration on your part, and that leads to you being distracted and not focusing on what you have to do in that upcoming point, and instead focusing on the opponent and the opponent's injury and what's their level like right now, and are they going to retire from the match, and all of these sorts of what if questions, rather than focusing on what they have to do in that next point and sort of the frustrations of their those expectations that they have in that moment. And it can be really tough to finish off a match that, in that type of a situation, or to even continue to play well. So yeah, I think just being able to put yourself in your opponent's shoes and recognizing that, hey, it might be, even if I'm feeling really bad right now and I'm feeling like I don't know if I can continue, or I'm not able to bring out my best, can I find ways to make this tough for my opponent? Can I sabotage their tactics? Can I make one more shot, extend the rally one more shot, and at least give myself a chance to stay in the point a little longer for them to maybe miss? What can I do to at least stay out there a little longer, give myself a chance? And then sometimes in those situations, matches can actually turn around.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, and if we concentrate a little bit more too on the player feeling the fatigue or that whatever that level of pain is, I want to just review some practical things and get your opinion on them, Josh. Like what you could do in the moment. You're out on the court, whether you're serving or receiving doesn't necessarily matter. Um, but you begin to feel this way, and I think the important thing, like we said, is not to overly identify with it. It's just to accept it, be aware of it. Um, and so, what do we do? So, some solutions that I have used with players, have used myself, and they may vary by player. So, one example would be don't act tired. Because if you act tired, it will only typically increase the amount of focus you have on being tired. So you may just want to bounce up and down a little bit just to create a little micro burst of energy to try to make yourself feel better. That may not work for everybody. For some players, it might be a better idea to be managing their energy between points. So perhaps we're walking a little bit differently, kind of conserving what we have, but you're mindful because you're in a kind of a zone of thinking about energy management. And I think last year when we saw Nadal play Medvedev in the final of the Australian Open, he didn't have quite the level of energy that he normally has between points, and he was managing that piece. Wasn't doing his normal thing. So, bouncing up and down may work for some people to just create some microbursts, but you could also then manage your energy between. I think one of the biggest things for players to be aware of is how are you talking to yourself at this time? Are you descending into problem and story thinking, or can you be more focused on using perhaps keywords or trigger words that will help you to feel better? So, for example, and this is something that happened to me when I was cramping in a match a few years ago, and I noticed, it's sort of a decrease in my ability to serve well. So before every point, I just said, good energy, good energy, good energy. And my serve was so much better by feeding myself these trigger words. So if you're someone who is prone maybe to get tired, or you're going to play an event in which you may be faced with 2 or 3 matches in one day, it's a good idea to plan what are the words or a script that you can use when this type of thing happens. And you can work with your coach on that, or a sports psych professional on that. But for me, good energy, that's what I like to use. And that also keeps me in the match, keeps me thinking about what I want to do. I'm looking for solutions. Something else to try, Josh, I think, is just commit to playing one point and then see what happens. So you play one point the best you can, and then you see what happens. And then you probably play another one. And then you'll probably play another one. and where you're really truly breaking it down to just 1 point at a time. You're not making any big decisions about, do I need to stay out here for another 30 minutes or whatever it is. I'm just going to play this 1 point with whatever I have in this moment, and we see where that leads to. So I just want to get some of your thoughts on some of those practical things to do when you're out, during one of these, during a game and playing.
Well, I think the concept of playing 1 point at a time is really important advice for tennis players in general. And I know that's something that we've talked a lot about. But I think particularly in that moment where somebody's physically struggling because of an injury, because of tiredness, really recommitting to that or reminding themselves of that and saying, okay, I don't need to focus right now on winning this match. I don't need to focus right now on how much longer I'm going to have to be out here. I don't need to focus on playing at the level that maybe I expect of myself or that I'm fully capable of in general, because it's likely that you won't be at your best and we won't be able to bring out that best level. But can I commit to doing my best, to giving my best effort, having a good attitude for this upcoming point? And I think that's the type of thing. And then in the next point, can I do it again? And can I do that again? And can I do that regardless of whatever happened in that last point? Maybe that last point I felt like my movement was really hampered because of that pain or because of that tiredness or whatever the situation. But can I commit to just trying to do my best for this upcoming point? I think is a really important mindset to have, to give yourself a chance to for you to feel like regardless of the circumstances, you've done everything in your power to be a good competitor and to yeah, and I think being a good competitor is going to look different each day, right? On certain days where you're feeling great and you're playing your best, it's a lot easier to be that top competitor and to give yourself that best possible chance. On the day where you're feeling horrible and your body you feel like maybe is letting you down or is not at its best, or you just played a 3 hour match and then the tournament director says, okay, you've got an hour, and then it's time to start again, um, and you're starting that next match, feeling sore, feeling tired, feeling exhausted, maybe not wanting to be out there in that same way. Being a good competitor, I think in that moment is tougher, but I think that's ultimately really the moments where um, the type of moment where this type of stuff, your mental toughness, your belief, your grit, your willingness to push past some of these tough feelings that you are likely to experience. I think that's really where it matters most, because anyone can have a good mindset and have a good attitude when things are going really well. But can you really dig deep? Can you believe? Can you focus just on that next point when you're in pain, when you're not at your best, when you can't even imagine how you could finish that match? Can you really focus on that next point and play point by point, play 1 point at a time in that moment?
Yeah, and I guess if we go back a little bit to the routine between points, when you're feeling this way, you really have to commit to that recovery phase of the routine. So you're probably going to be taking longer between points. And something else that has come up a lot over the last few years is this notion of you must play to the pace of the server. And just to clarify that wording is not correct. You must play to the reasonable pace of the server, and the server has to provide the receiver a reasonable amount of time to recover. Now, that doesn't mean you can be taking 25, 30 seconds on the other guy's serve or the other woman's serve. But you're not required to play 5 seconds and ready to go. So, unfortunately, many, at least the officials in the United States, don't seem to know that rule as well as they should, because I have lots of clients who are constantly pushed by officials to play to the pace of the server, and they're not actually checking on the pace of the server being unreasonable. But that's a bit of an aside here. The idea is make sure you are paying attention to that recovery phase of the between points routine, so that you can feel as energized as you can before that point. So I think that's some solid advice, Josh, about what to do while we're out there playing. Now, of course, there's a changeover, and we've got some time there to perhaps refuel, and just really get our bodies back in shape for the next couple of games. And I think when we're looking at it, this being more of an energy issue, certainly trying to get more carbs into your body is advisable. Sports drinks can also be helpful with that, with both carbs and electrolytes. But make sure that as a tennis competitor, you're well prepared with snacks and drinks, so you can do that. Before we started to record, you also mentioned massage guns, whether that's a Theragun, Hypervolt, or some other one. That's something that could be used on a changeover just by yourself. Certainly, that's something we use after a match or before. If you have multiple matches, you can use that. And again, this is a great time to be thinking about what are your keywords and trigger words that are going to help keep you focused on what you're trying to do, whether it's stuff like good energy, or if you've got a reminder sheet or a notebook that you can be looking at that may even have some advice in there for what to be doing and thinking when you're feeling tired. So I'm a big proponent of creating reminder sheets or pages in your notebook, and a lot of times they should be situational, whether that's this situation where I'm feeling fatigued, or other situations that may occur in a match that you're trying to deal with. So it's a great opportunity to go there and begin to think more productively about what you want to do. So Josh, I wanted to get your feedback on what are some other things people can be doing on that changeover.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to, like what you're saying, to have a plan. Have a plan, because this situation is likely to happen at some point, right? And
For
there's
some
maybe
of us,
certain
more often
moments.
than others, right? So, right, you
Totally,
got to know
totally.
yourself if that's what it is, right?
Absolutely. And maybe if you have a history of certain injuries or cramps, or just having a tough time maybe playing back-to-back matches, and you know that if you win one, and again, maybe this brings up a different topic of should we be looking ahead towards future matches within a tournament, but you can also, I think it is reasonable to say, hey, if I do win this match, I know that I have a second match later in the day. And historically, has that been tough for me to handle? So I think being able to know yourself, remember the past, and hopefully learn from it. And I think using a journal, using some sort of reflection exercise can be really helpful here. But beyond that, I think there's definitely some tools that tennis players can use. You know, leading up to it. And I think, using some sort of a reminder system, maybe a note card, that's something I do with a lot of players, in terms of, it can be very easy if we're having a session. It can be very easy to think of certain mindsets or certain strategies and be able to come up with them. But when you're in the heat of the moment, it can be a lot harder to remember certain things and keep certain things in mind. So being able to have that reminder system and bring it with you, be able to review it ahead of time and then actually bring it with you to the court is really helpful. And yeah, just like you're saying, Brian, having certain situations and a plan for it. Okay, if this, then that. If I am in pain, if I'm cramping, this is what I want to do. If I'm exhausted, this is how I want to handle that moment. I want to spend a little bit of extra time in between points. I want to really focus on my breathing. I want to make sure my decision making is as good as possible. So those are a couple of ideas there. I think visualization is also really key here. I think we can visualize. I think sometimes with visualization, people get the sense that we only want to visualize really positive situations. Okay, I'm serving and it's love, love. Okay, I hit an ace right on the line. Okay, 15 love, up another ace. Oh, 30 love. Oh, serve. Okay, they return it, and I hit a huge winner. But I think there's some benefit of visualizing ourselves playing just amazing and everything going well, but I think we also want to visualize ourselves coming through tough situations. And one of those tough situations is, some of those tough situations are the types of things that we're talking about, playing through pain, playing through fatigue, exhaustion, um, and coming through it. So can we visualize ourselves being in that situation and then utilizing certain skills for how we want to handle it and then coming through it. And I think actually, that time, if we go to the situation where you just played a long match and you have another match coming up in 45 minutes or an hour or whatever the situation is, that could be a great time to visualize that, even during the changeovers, right? If you have about 90 seconds generally, and you're struggling, and again, can we focus on that next point as much as possible once we get out there? Absolutely. But during that changeover, can we visualize ourselves, how we want to be handling that time in between points, how we want to be playing, that energy that we want to bring, that attitude that we want to have after, during and after points, whether we've won or lost the last one. Can we spend some of that time visualizing and really try to maximize that time to help set us up for success and to help give ourselves a chance once we get back out there?
I think, yeah, the visualization, whether you're doing that on the court in the changeover, is great, and also doing it beforehand as part of your regular preparation. Before we started to record, you mentioned Michael Phelps and how he has done this type of thing. I think Novak Djokovic has also done, his use of visualization has been much more on seeing himself through tough situations. I don't know that he necessarily visualizes this particular one. Maybe he does. Um, but it is a great way to use visualization so that when the situation occurs, it just feels more like you're prepared for it. You know what to do, and you don't get stuck just thinking about the problem and creating a story around it. So it gives you the confidence and the belief that you can get through it, and it also, because you're visualizing it, you're seeing yourself solve the problem and and take it on. So I do think that's a great use of visualization, um, and something that could really be a big part of one's preparation. Certainly, preparation is a big part, Josh. I think in maybe helping to prevent fatigue as much as possible. I mean, there are a lot of factors that go into our energy management when it comes to this. It's, sleep, your nutrition level, your hydration, your overall conditioning. Um, so wherever you are as a player in those things, it's going to have an effect on your ability to play long matches, to play multiple matches in a day. So some of the things that we're talking about today are more just like you're in the moment and you guys got to deal with it. But of course, there can be some longer term solutions in which you look at those energy sources and begin to deal with those so that the instances of getting fatigued hopefully become, fewer and fewer, and deal with it in that way. Um, let's go to that other situation, Josh, where, yeah, we've got multiple matches in a day. We're coming off the court. Um, maybe we've got an hour, maybe we've got a little bit longer to get ready for that. I think we've already discussed a bunch of things that we can do there. Um, but one of them, I think, is I've had this challenge, and perhaps you have as well, is you're off the court, and yes, you have to play another match. And now there's another story that begins to play out in your mind. Is like, do I even want to do this? And um, and you've got to really, again, figure out, do you really want to deal with this? Um, what is the importance of this next match? Is it worth it? If there's pain or excessive exhaustion or cramps, can you actually go out and perform? Is it safe to perform? But if you're able to answer yes to those questions, um, then again you have to commit to it and go out there. I know that there have been a few tournaments in which I have felt that way, and maybe my initial reaction was like, I just don't want to do this, but I've often been talked into it. And once I'm, either I'm talking myself into it or other people are helping talk me into it, I've been able to fully commit to it. And some of those matches I've won, some of them I lost, just like, very normal. But almost in all of those instances, I felt better once I started to play. Right? I feel probably felt a lot worse between the matches and maybe a little bit rough in the warm up, but then it starts to kind of feel better a little bit. And I don't know if that's your experience too, but it's possible that that could be the experience for you as you approach that second match. But I think there's a lot of things that, in terms of refueling, massaging, foam rolling, stretching. Um, Again, depending on the time, maybe you can even get a short nap, close your eyes for just even 5-10 minutes could be really beneficial towards recovery, right? So this is a recovery time. Um, Jim Lair and Tony Schwartz have a great book called The Power of Full Engagement, where they talk about life as alternating between expending energy and recovering energy. So your match, you've been doing a lot of expending. You've got to do as much as you can in that hour recovering energy and going to your fuel sources. So again, food, resting, relaxing, maybe sleeping, if you can. Stretching out everything you can to recover that. But again, a lot of this is going to come down to your commitment to play, and then looking for solutions and actions that you want to take. Um, so, any further thoughts, Josh, about handling that time between matches?
Yeah, I mean, I think your broader mindset about why do you play the sport? What are some of the qualities that you want to be exhibiting? I think that that's all really important here as well. In terms of, can you try to view this, regardless of how you're feeling, can you try to view the situation as a challenge, rather than a threat? Can you try to say, okay, this is a real challenge in front of me I have to go out there and play this match. I'm not feeling good. I'm not feeling my best, and I have an opponent out there in front of me. So can I view this as a challenge to, prove something to myself, to demonstrate certain qualities, to be resilient, to be tough in that moment? I think is really key. But I think it also raises a broader question of when is it appropriate, or when is it right to say, you know what, I can't do this. When, and I think, I know, Brian, you, both of us have experience with college tennis. And, I think in that situation, there's a trainer, there's, so somebody that can take a look and provide, a professional opinion, but, an athletic trainer, someone that can provide a professional medical opinion. But what if there's not access to that? What if you're playing in a USTA tournament? What if you're playing in a USTA league? What if whatever, UTR or international or whatever the situation is, you don't have access to somebody like that, and your match is coming up and you're in pain? I have been fortunate to not have that situation happen to me. But I know it certainly is common. So what do you think is the best way for people to approach situations like that, or in a match where they're feeling in pain? I think it's maybe one of the toughest things for tennis players and athletes of any kind to decide, right?
Yeah.
When to retire, in a match, when to maybe withdraw, right? And not risk themselves making things worse. But what do you think in terms of how tennis players should approach that?
Well, I think one of the hard things that's a challenge, Josh, is many of us as tennis players, we're not good at quitting. And so that's admirable in a way, but we also have to be aware of like the longer term health um, consequences. So I think we all need to understand pain that we can play in that may be either nagging or something we can play through versus pain that is indicating we should stop, which tends to be more on the more momentary trauma type of thing, whether that's going down because of an injury like an ankle. You maybe twisted your ankle, or you've done something to a knee, or you've felt something in your body like a shoulder or a wrist, and asking yourself, if I continue, is there likely that I will do further damage to this? Um, of course, again, admirable that we all want to continue to play, but can we recognize the difference between, the pain that you can play through and it's not going to get worse, or even if it got worse, it's not like really a terrible, terrible injury, versus something that really could cause longer term consequences that would then result in you being out of the sport for a little while. And so I think that sometimes, Josh, really comes down to some experience and going through some of it. Some of those things may be very obvious. If you can't walk after twisting an ankle, there's really no point. I mean, you could even try, but you may even try for a few points and then realize, okay, I can't even move. I have no chance of even winning any points like this, right? So there may be that in which you're completely compromised. But I think the question you're asking is a little bit more like, well, you can kind of play, but should I play? And that's a tough call because there's no real certainty, of course. But I think if we value our health, because remember, this is just tennis for the most part, right? There will always be more matches, more tournaments, etc. But if you compromise your health, there will be fewer of those. And so, you pulling out of a match for something that you think is going to preserve your health, I think is always, I have no issue with that reasoning. For me, I've had a lot of cramping issues. I'm I only have actually one kidney, so like getting dehydration and cramping issues is somewhat an issue with respect to long-term health. And so I've had to, make that part of my tennis playing DNA, is that if I start to feel a certain way, that, okay, it's better for me to, exit the match now rather than, having to go to an ER to get, like an IV and rehydrated and all of that, and then to deal with the consequences of, my medical situation, right? Everybody's got to know themselves a little bit more, and at first I didn't know. The first few times that this happened to me, I didn't know that would have an effect on that level of functioning for me. But now I do. And so when I get in those situations, I'm much more careful about what to do. So everybody's got to kind of know their own medical history and what can affect that. But I think it's always a good idea to understand, that your long-term health is more important than any one particular match. It may not feel like that in the moment. And again, I think that's to the credit of most of us as tennis players, is that we don't like to quit. We all do have a strong desire to win. But we don't want that to necessarily override being smart about our health and the ability to continue to enjoy and learn and improve from the game.
Totally. Totally. No, I think that's definitely true. And I think in a certain way, there's almost a antiquated idea among some people of what mental toughness is.
Right.
And I think some people sort of view it as, regardless of everything, I need to be tough and I need to sort of put on a brave face. And I think you're bringing up a really important point that, that there are situations where, you are putting yourself at future risk, both in terms of being able to play your sport going forward and maybe health beyond that. So I think it's you have to be able in that moment to make that decision, and it's a tough decision. You know, tennis being an individual sport, a sport where it's just you out there, I think especially when people have played the sport for long enough, you start to develop certain qualities that, regardless of what happens, I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to keep playing. But I think sometimes, and it is one of the toughest decisions a player can make, being able to say, you know what, I can't do this right now. This isn't worth it. This isn't worth the risk is one of the toughest, but one of the most important decisions a player has to make because, it's not worth it in that moment to jeopardize your future over this one match. And I think we've seen that happen at times, and it certainly does happen. So I think it's a lot about knowing yourself, understanding your body, understanding maybe any conditions that you have, and and making decisions with those things in mind, and not just sort of staying out there regardless, because you really could be doing damage to yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's not an easy decision, and you may not always get it right. I mean, I think there have been times in Rafael Nadal's career where he's been questioned, like whether he should have quit or whether he should have kept playing, and he's done both. To be clear, he is at times he is retired from matches, and other times he's stuck it out. And people wonder, like, well, was he doing more damage to this, and maybe he missed a few months afterwards because he stuck it out. So it's never an easy question, and I don't think there's ever really an exact way for you to know which one to do. But ultimately, it comes down to, can you at least have your long-term health be one of the decision criteria that you're using when you're out there? And if it is, then that will help you make the right decision. It might be the right decision to continue to play, and that you can, and everything's going to be fine. So, but I think that's one of the harder points to deal with when you're not feeling great or you're feeling a little bit of pain. What do you do? And unfortunately, it may take some experience because you may not have had so many experiences with pain and fatigue to even know how your body will react to this. But the older you get, you tend to have more experiences like these, Josh, and you'll find out a little bit more as I know you're going to start competing more, and so yeah, maybe you'll be running into some of these things.
Hopefully not too much.
At least not this episode, right?
But yeah, no, I think it is true that, people have different circumstances based on age, based on body type, based on past history, based on all these different things. So I think, it is important to reiterate that it really, you have to know yourself. You have to understand your body, your history, what works or doesn't work well for you. And also I think planning accordingly. I think one of my favorite books, and that I know we've talked about a lot in the past, Winning Ugly, by Brad Gilbert, devotes an entire chapter to how you pack your bag. And that to some might seem unnecessary or ridiculous or almost like an afterthought. How am I going to pack my bag? Well, of course I'm going to have a couple tennis rackets, maybe a towel, maybe a sports drink, water, whatever. But in that chapter, Brad Gilbert really talks about all of these different things that you can include. He talked about how there was a time where he won a match where I think had his shoe broke essentially, and he had an extra pair of shoes in the bag, and because of that he managed to keep playing and won the match. I don't know how many people bring an extra pair of shoes when they're out there. I certainly haven't in the past. Can you bring layers, right? Depending on the weather, a hat, sunglasses. Can you bring maybe certain types of food? Especially if it's a 3.5 hour match and you're really battling out there, having certain types of nourishment is going to be really important. Maybe you're prepared for cramps, and that's happened in the past. So maybe it's salt tablets or certain types of things that are specific to cramping that could be helpful, especially if you've had that situation happen in the past, could be really important. And I think also, and among many other things, but I think, it leads to a certain being prepared in that way leads to a certain level of confidence. And it's a confidence that regardless of what happens out there, you feel equipped and you are ready to handle that situation. And you've put in the work ahead of time, whether it's on the mental side in terms of visualizing certain situations, coming up with a plan for how you want to handle them, planning out your self-talk, whether it's on the physical side in terms of your strength and conditioning, what are you doing off court to maybe handle certain injuries that have happened in the past and, rehab them, whether it's your endurance, what are you doing to give yourself a better chance for playing 2 matches in a day, for handling a third set, um, whether it's whether it's how you want to handle these situations and having that clear game plan, and doing that preparation ahead of time and in some of these different areas, I think the better, you're setting yourself up with a better chance for success that way.
For sure. So if you're a player, who has experienced fatigue or pain, hopefully we've been able to give you some, not only mindsets but some practical tips for how to deal with this in the moment, how to deal with it between matches, how to deal with it from a preparation perspective. So, as always, thank you for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions, especially about this topic, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. You can also use the Twitter hashtag tennisiq. Additionally, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, so you can be notified of new episodes. You can also check us out on Instagram. If you would like to support the podcast, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiq/membership. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.